Hi, I am Dimitris Mavrokephalides. Welcome to This Big Zero Show 100 Days of Labor podcast. Today we are discussing energy cost and finance. Sam Hollister, Head of Energy Economics, Policy and Investment at LCP Delta, and Matthew Deitz, Senior Consultant at LCP Delta, here with us. In this first part of the podcast, we'll be discussing about the current energy landscape, and we are now more than 100 days into the new government. From your perspective, what have been the key impacts of the new administration's policies on energy costs and finance?
Hi, good morning. Hi. So I'm Sam Hollister, Head of Economics. Thank you very much for having us here today. Yeah, it's been an incredibly interesting first 100 days or so of the Labour government. I think the standout thing for me has been a real kind of energy and momentum being brought to energy policy and decarbonisation, seeing lots of very interesting announcements and policy decisions, including increasing the CFD budget, the announcements around onshore wind, and also the solar projects getting underway. So lots of kind of very good start, I guess, for the new government. Lots of things, still questions remain, big ambitions around clean power to 2030 and big announcements around GB energy, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later, because those are the things that are probably eye-catching, but people lacking detail at the moment. So I guess that's kind of my immediate reflection on the first 100 days or so.
What's your take, Matthew? How have these policy announcements saved energy prices and companies and consumers so far?
Yeah, I mean, so I think so. Firstly, hi, Matt Deitz. I'm senior consultant at LCP Delta. Thank you so much for having us on today. So I think actually, like beyond all of that, I think sort of like where the government so far has had the biggest impact on the energy sector and the wider economy is just increasing that investor confidence and sentiment into the UK. They've brought quite an awful lot of stability to the UK market. Just by going through with this mission-led policy making regime and process. And I think the appointment of Chris Stark into that mission control position, I think probably actually, if I'm being honest, I mean, not from a political perspective at all, but was a masterstroke, right? Like very much bringing all of energy policy making under one roof and, joining up, what is the planning constraints? What is the environmental constraints, environmental permitting constraints? And then looking into, well, actually, then how do we get these projects off the ground with some sort of revenue support mechanism? Which I think, as you look forward and we look to better or implement the British energy security strategy going forwards, starting to like wean ourselves off of global energy markets and the price shocks they can bring with us as an importer. I think it's only going to get better as we go forward, so long as they can actually fulfill and move forwards and actually deliver on what they've promised so far.
You mentioned the word stability. How do you feel that the stability was the missing link from the previous government and from all these years in terms of energy prices? And I would like to ask you regarding the energy prices and inflation, because obviously these two terms seem closely connected. With the rise in global prices and inflation hitting households and businesses, what do you see as the most significant drivers behind the recent trends in energy prices?
Yeah, Sam, I think I'll probably take that for us, right? So I think, look, when you look at stability of the government overall, I think that actually confidence in GB and UK was actually relatively high up until Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng budget. And I think, oh, Liz Truss probably not so much, but I think Kwasi Kwarteng has kind of accepted that and admitted that in the intervening period. I think the energy policy across Europe and across the UK was pretty much to rely on the economics of the global energy market, right? And we very much relied on that significant, large, energy exporter of Russia and how cheap that gas, oil, and coal was, right? And actually, when you look at Russia as an energy exporter and what they could provide, it's actually pretty good, right? Like, we relied on them for our coal, for example, which, closed in September. Our final one closed in September 2024. So a few days ago. But really, so their coal was fantastic coal, right? It was very low sulfur content, very good for NOx and SOx and all of our environmental permitting in the UK. So When they then had to pivot away from that, well, where do you go? You can't really get coal out of the UK because the coal isn't the right kind of coal to put in the gas power in the coal power stations. So we relied on Russia. Now, as we look forward, we've had to pivot away from that very quickly because we relied on one single point of failure in UK and Europe for our energy supply, and we've had to pivot away from that towards liquefied natural gas imports, imports from other countries, looking at Colombia into the Middle East and also East Asia. But as we look forward, we have to consider like how we can maintain a lower price going forwards because the headline inflation cost has been driven by energy, of course. I mean, it's the primary input to our economy. And I think that actually we've probably been quite surprised over the past few years that just how well European and UK energy supply chains have pivoted away from Russia so successfully, which, as we go forwards, it should start. So, energy costs should start to levelize and go forwards. And they're now pivoting around the sort of like 40, 30 to 50 euros a megawatt hour in TTF and NBP, the gas benchmarks. As we go forward, we think that actually the input cost of energy should perhaps stabilize, and therefore inflation should stabilize now, and we should get towards sort of bank targets towards the end of this year, and we should start to see interest rates start to come off as well as the Bank of England can start to ease that and ease that bank rate.
In terms of what can be done to drive these energy prices down, what can you say, Sam, regarding this thing? I'm not really sure if you have checked a recent report by former competition czar, former Conservative Minister John Penrose, who argues that the current energy system here in the UK is overly complex and reliant on international gas prices. And Penrose suggests decoupling energy bills from gas prices and addressing renewable energy intermittency. What are your thoughts on his recommendation, and what do you generally recommend?
Yeah, I think there's almost two things. There's quite a lot in that statement, I suppose. The thing that comes to my mind is, you're asking about prices and short term, looking for this winter. There's not a great deal that government can really do other than provide a subsidy or support mechanism to people's energy bills because fundamentally they are still set by gas prices. They are, as Matt has just outlined, kind of international gas prices. And there's not really much that the government can do on that in the short term while gas still plays a major role in our power system. I think what the government are looking to do is by having a clean power system by 2030, and we've done quite a considerable amount of modelling and kind of forecasting what exactly that looks like. Gas is going to play a much smaller role. It will still be there in 2030, right? We'll still be relying on it for that intermittency that you just spoke about, but we are going to be kind of heavily renewable dominated. And I think that's what government are almost kind of banking on for that future energy system where energy prices will be set by domestic renewables rather than international gas prices. And then you are starting to decouple naturally the gas prices from the renewables mechanisms. And I think also at that point in time, if you look into the 2030s, things like CFDs will be playing a much more, almost you could turn around and say a lot of the energy system will be backed by CFD, given the amount of offshore and onshore and solar. And naturally by CFD, you are starting to stabilize those prices. So you are starting to mute the impact of gas. I know that's probably not exactly what politicians want to hear, that we're looking 5 years out, but it's a future system that we're aiming towards. And unfortunately, I don't think there's much that can really be done in the short term, certainly not if you're thinking for this winter, for example.
Sam, thank you for that. You gave us a rough outlook of the coming months, but I would like to ask you, as we move into the colder months, regarding the gas stock levels, because, this kind of stuff is a really critical concern for many people and businesses. How have gas stock levels evolved since the spring, and what are the potential implications for energy costs this winter?
Yeah, so when we look at the gas market, we have bearish fundamentals and then bullish fundamentals playing out at the moment. So bearish fundamentals, things that are going to drive down the energy price. We hit the 90% full target in European gas storage a few weeks ago, a full 10 weeks before the targets that the European Union set for gas storage. And that was really a product of the fact that we inherited such a high gas storage level coming out of the previous winter. And that is that comes from the fact that we've had a couple of, on average, warmer than expected winters, which obviously drives down gas demand, demand for heating, demand for gas to power, etc. But then we've got the bullish fundamentals. Now, gas storage, although it's a fantastic headline figure, isn't the be all and end all when it comes to the supply stack for European energy. You do have to look at the geopolitical tensions across the world actually at the moment, across globally. So you've obviously got the Russia-Ukrainian war, which is still ongoing. We do still have levels of Russian imports coming through Ukraine. That's part of the Russia-Ukrainian gas transit agreement, which is due to come to an end at the or due to expire at the end of this year. But then you've also got the conflicts in the Middle East at the moment. Now, the problem you have with the conflict in the Middle East is that the Middle East is a significant exporter of LNG to Europe, and that was a key supply that we pivoted towards following the Russian invasion of Ukraine a couple of years ago. What happens there is that if there's conflict in the Middle East, there are risks of that you're not going to be able to get LNG out of that area. Now, what I mean by that is the Strait of Hormuz. That is a significant choke point in global goods transport routes, and that's obviously where Qatar accesses the global market. Qatar being one of the largest exporters of LNG globally, and then obviously you've then got the Suez Canal. Now, the problem with the Suez Canal being closed or basically opting to not go through the Suez Canal is it significantly increases the transit time from the Middle East to Europe because you can't cut out the going around the Cape of Good Hope.
Right. Thank you for that. I would like to continue with the current government policies and industry response. Regarding the energy profits levy, of course, and obviously it has been a point of debate in the industry. How do you think it has impacted investment in the energy sector, particularly in oil and gas versus renewable energy projects?
Yeah, so I'll probably start off by saying, look, like taxing such a key industry in the UK, it comes with its risks, right? So the oil and gas sector is a significant investor in the kinds of skills that we need going forwards. So particularly offshore skills, which are crucial to things like offshore wind, right? And then going forwards as well, even hydrogen to power, the production of hydrogen, and then also the storage of carbon. It's basically an evolution of the oil and gas sector as we know today. I think that what happened is really the UK government made it very clear that there is not going to be tax exemptions and tax relief for business as usual for oil and gas. So they removed or the key for me isn't necessarily the tax increase from 35 to 38%, but it's more around the tax allowances. So when you look at the tax allowances, so you've got the ones that were implemented by the previous government, which basically allowed for business as usual. So any sort of like investment in just maintaining your oil and gas production. And then you've got your decarbonisation allowances, and that basically said, well, if you can find a way of decarbonising your business operations, then there is a tax allowance there. Now, crucially, that remains. Now, what has been removed has been the business as usual one that I was talking about just now, and you've had a lot of noise recently by the oil and gas sector saying it's terrible news for them. Absolutely. I'm sure if you're a CFO or a financial director of one of these businesses, you are panicking a bit that you were hoping that you weren't going to be taxed so high. But
You have to pay, yeah, of course,
yeah,
something
exactly.
more. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, totally. So I think it's given its take, right? So you have to be careful about how you tax so high, but also at the same time, like it was very lenient, I think, at the time. And when you look at the electricity generators levy, they didn't have any kind of tax relief for investment, any kind of investment allowances. So it's good that they're bringing that into line, but also it comes with its risks because you don't want to scare away that investment into the UK market when we're going to rely on it so heavily.
But overall, Matt, do you feel that the energy profits levy strikes the right balance between the new investment in renewable energy projects and allowing energy companies to remain profitable?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I see. A 3% increase is not going to break the bank, right? I don't think. But what it does do is it does bring forward sort of like the risks that you're going to invest further in the sector. I think the key thing that you have to lean on here is let's make sure that if I'm going to be advising the UK government right now, it's going to be make sure that you are actually properly engaging with these sectors and you're not just saying, actually, we have a massive deficit right now. Let's just attack this one single sector.
I would like to go to the recent contracts for difference auction, which saw a record breaking number of renewable energy projects that secured funding. Do you believe that this auction outcome is enough for the 2030 clean power target that the government has set? What's your take, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, the headline figure obviously was very impressive, a record number of projects. However, if you're going to get 2030 and, the government, looking at kind of levels of 50, 55 gigawatts of offshore wind, at the moment, we have about 14 gigawatts installed. We have another 12 or 13 gigawatts in the CFD pipeline. So we're kind of almost, if you like, halfway there. But actually, there's only a couple more auctions left if you're actually going to get anywhere near 50 to 55 gigawatts, because it's going to take you 4 years to build them. So you're looking at maybe an auction in 2025 and an auction in 2026. That's approximately 12 gigawatts of offshore wind you've got to be procuring in both of those auctions. So I think you can kind of look at the record number of projects, which are predominantly onshore and solar. And then think, well, actually, we need to kind of do a lot more on the offshore wind if we're going to get anywhere near those kind of figures that we're looking at. So I think what the recent budget was about 1.1, 1.2 billion. I think you're looking that you need to kind of double that. Our analysis has said that, if you kind of take into account, if you sort of assume the same parameters from the last auction and you're looking at the same kind of CFD clearing prices, you probably need about a 2.5 to 3 billion pound auction. And crucially, the right number of projects as well to come forwards, because that's a risk in industry at the moment, or a concern, is that government ends up just becoming a price taker, because you effectively just need to take any project that is available almost at any price in order if you're going to try and get to 50 to 55 gigawatts, and that is not a competitive auction. So there are kind of that challenge there of setting such an ambitious target from the UK government.
Let's talk about the future outlook. I know that we have briefly covered this topic at the start of this podcast. As we approach the winter months, what are your predictions for energy costs? Do you expect prices to rise significantly? And what factors will have the most influence on these trends? And how do you think these potential cost increases will affect both residential consumers and businesses?
So going forwards into the winter months, I think the thing that makes it so uncertain is that European energy prices are driven so much at the moment, obviously by gas, but TTF, which is the European benchmark for gas. Now, what we've had over the past a few years, right, particularly since the energy crisis, has been a very reactive, very volatile gas benchmark in TTF, and that's quite significantly driven by the amount of speculative trading that we have in there. What I mean by speculative trading is essentially an investor or a hedge fund taking a speculative position in the market. So never really intending on settling that power and consuming it, but rather saying, I'm going to bet on this market increasing in price in the future. So I'm going to buy gas now and hold it, and then I'm going to sell it on in the future. Also known as arbitrage in the market. Now, the balance of the benchmark over the past few months has been, or past couple of years, has been significantly long. And what I mean is all of those investors and hedge funds taking long positions in order to sell it on again in the future. Now, that means that with that amount of speculative bidding in the market, any kind of geopolitical risk or risk to supply basically means that those sorts of investors flood into the market a bit and buy a position in the market, buy a contract in the market. And that in itself puts up the demand and therefore increases the price. So I think as we go forwards, I think the playing out of the Middle East and the playing out of the Russia-Ukrainian war and what goes after the Russia-Ukrainian gas transit agreement that I was talking about earlier, I think that's going to be a key driver of actually what the energy prices over the next year look like. At the moment, we think they've stabilized from the highs of earlier in the year. and we think they've come down, as I said, to that range around about 40 euros a megawatt hour in gas, which obviously is a key driver of also power. Now, that obviously at the moment we're like, oh, okay, it's settled a bit. Okay, we can calm down a bit. But actually, what happens over the next few months? I'm not going to gaze into a crystal ball right now because I think that they could go up, and therefore you could get an inflationary sting going forwards. But we are definitely more settled than we have been in the past. Now, obviously, that then feeds into your business and your consumers' energy bills. And I think as we look forward, we are going to see a start to uptick in the price cap, particularly for domestic consumers, which obviously then would be the same for your industrial and commercial.
I mean, on that as well, I mean, energy prices have fallen quite, you know, dramatically over the last couple of years, right? From the highs of the early days of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So on one hand, there's kind of, if you look, kind of your prices are probably half of what they could or should have been in that period. But that's still incredibly high. And there are going to be people that are struggling with these level of energy bills. And I think that is then the responsibility of the UK government and also energy suppliers to figure out kind of how they can support customers through this winter. But as Matt said, kind of short term, it is going to be, we are still going to be impacted by gas prices or gas shocks, and we are still going to be dependent on weather, right? During particularly kind of bad weather or something that's going to impact through the gas prices and through the level of heating and bits and pieces. So still lots and lots to do. Energy prices are in a better place than they were a couple of years ago, but they are still historically at much higher levels than we've seen kind of for the previous. Well,
Yeah, and these energy shocks, these gas shocks, they are cyclical. We might be. I've heard a lot of people say, we're out of the energy crisis. Now we might be out of the energy crisis, but actually, you know, where's the next one coming from? I think is the key question we should be asking. Like, if we're really saying that we're out of the energy crisis, well, either this is going to be a continuation of the previous energy
Yeah.
crisis, or we're going to be looking into a new one. And you know, tension in the Middle East, right? Like, it's not. We are probably in one of the most uncertain periods of recent time at the moment across globally. So we need to be looking at where the next one's coming from, and I think that's what UK government's doing quite well.
It sounds like a never-ending circle, right? Before we wrap up, Sam and Matthew, I would like to give you both the opportunity to share any final thoughts or concluding comments regarding energy prices, energy costs, and finance. And how do you feel that the UK will hit its net zero target? Of course, the government has set these 2030 decarbonized grid target. Do you feel that this target is feasible enough?
I'll start with the short term, and then I'm sure Sam will love to gaze into his crystal ball and tell you about the long term. So I'll leave that to Sam. But in the short term, I think that what I would like to see going forwards is from the UK government is a clear signal that they are on top of the energy prices and the energy costs that are currently playing out across the globe, and the key risks that plays in the UK's energy price. So I think that's where we were kind of caught unawares a bit with the previous energy crisis. Is that from early 2021 we did see energy prices start to uptick as the market started to recognise the risk between Russia and Ukraine, and then increasing Russian aggression towards Europe. Now, I'm not convinced that the UK government actually saw that coming until it slapped us in the face in September, October time that year. I would like to see that the UK government now actually shows that they are on top of these issues ahead of time rather than reacting.
okay, yeah, I'll take the longer term then. So yes, I think almost the overriding feeling at the moment is one of genuine kind of excitement around things like clean power 2030. I think if you talk to many in industry, it's ambitious, challenging. You'll probably find other people who actually think it's feasible, but it's certainly got people looking for investments, looking to deploy renewable technology, and therefore kind of it's almost you sort of shoot for the stars and kind of slightly miss, rather than I think probably the feeling of the previous government was one of kind of setting targets, but actually there wasn't really the policy to necessarily back that up. I think the early indications from the Labour government are good. I think I agree with Matt that appointing somebody like Chris Stark into mission control immediately gets people, he has the respect of industry, and having held a similar role at the Committee on Climate Change, knows his way around Whitehall and energy policy and industry. So I think that's an interesting one to see what they come up with at the end of the year. I do think that 2030 is incredibly challenging. You're probably looking at a few other things than necessarily just renewables. That's probably the one thing I've probably lacked in the UK government so far is there's been a strong focus on CFDs, a strong focus on onshore wind or solar through the CFDs. We're not really seeing the kind of the complementary generation technologies at the moment. We don't quite know what the role is yet around carbon capture and storage or hydrogen to power and also long duration storage. So I think probably by the end of the year, I would want to be sort of seeing more from the government around their ambitions in that space and exactly how they're going to support those sorts of technologies. Because I think everybody that will be listening to this podcast or watching this as a webinar will appreciate that, you know, a very heavily renewable dominated electricity system may well be great when, you know, they're operating, but what is it that's going to be backing up that power? And I think we all agree that we don't want that to be as much gas as we currently have on the system. We need to be looking at gas running 5% of the time.
Actually, so just quickly as well, what Sam just said, I actually think that it was a bit of a lucky masterstroke for Labour as well that Rishi Sunak called the election earlier in 2024 because, I mean, although you'll be able to tell whether Labour are going to meet their 2030 commitment in 2029, an election in 2029 obviously works in Labour's favour because they can go into the next election saying, "Well, we haven't missed it yet," right? Like, or they can go into it and be like, "Look how close we are to hitting our target." So, actually, I think Rishi Sunak probably did them a favour there as a very sort of like non-political commentator here, so I'm sure Sam will probably, or others listening will probably disagree with that. But I think actually when you go to the electorate and you go, well, I haven't missed it yet, I think that holds a lot of gravitas.
Sam and Matt, thank you very, very much for joining this podcast and sharing all these valuable insights and expertise. It was really a pleasure talking to you. Thank you again. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks again for joining us. Stay tuned to Future Net Zero and Energy Live News, where more content and exciting speakers will be joining us at the Big Zero 100 Days of Labour. Tomorrow we are discussing about heating decarbonization. For more details on the next sessions of the 100 Days online conference, keep an eye on our live updates.